record.
Just for the record, we're not going to be execing 1603 today because we'd had some more information that was coming forward. So we're going to hold off for one more week on that. I know some people really wanted that, but we're going to hold off a little bit. So with that, I'm going to call the hearing for HB 1742 and ask for the prime sponsor to step up to the plate. Mr. Chairman, how are you, sir?
Good morning, Chairman Avard and honorable members of the Senate ENR. For the record, Representative Michael Vose. I represent the town of Epping, Rockingham District 5, and I serve as Chair of Science, Technology, and Energy in the House. I'm here this morning to introduce House Bill 1742 relative to customer generation inadvertently enrolled in a municipal or county aggregation program. So people who've been around for a while will recall that back in 2021, 2022, we passed House Bill 315, which really got community aggregation off the ground and up and running. And the major change we made in that bill was to allow aggregation programs to be opt-out instead of opt-in, as well as opt-in. Opt-in never worked, but opt-out definitely does work. And what opt-out does is it automatically enrolls customers in an aggregation once an aggregation plan is adopted by a community. So everybody who lives in a town will get a notice, let's say in the month of September, if their plan launches on October 1st. And that notice announces that they will be moving from their default service utility to the new aggregation program in their town. And if they have a problem with that, they can always opt out of being automatically enrolled. But if they don't do that, then they will be automatically enrolled. Well, the process to do that enrollment is probably not perfect, and it occasionally makes a mistake. There is one class of customer that actually can't be enrolled in a community aggregation program, and that's net metering customers, because community aggregation vendors can't support net metering. Only distribution utilities can support net metering. But occasionally, I know of at least two instances, someone was inadvertently enrolled in a community aggregation program and subsequently, as a result, lost net metering credits. In the case of one hydro owner that I'm aware of, they lost a substantial number, like 3 months worth of net metering credits, which was worth considerable amount of money, somewhere around $90,000 to $100,000. So I've submitted this bill, which is a remedy for that situation. If someone is inadvertently enrolled in a community aggregation program and subsequently loses net metering credits, they can go to their distribution utility and request that those credits be restored and paid back. And that's the substance of this bill. It gives you about 4 months worth of credit recovery, and it gives you a similar amount of time to notify your utility that you were inadvertently enrolled and you've lost credits as a result. So that's the substance of the bill. It's actually a fairly simple bill. It doesn't happen a lot, but for those people to whom it happens, it's a big deal. And so I think it's appropriate to provide a statutory remedy for this problem. And I hope I can earn your support for this bill, and I'm happy to answer
Well, you got some
questions.
great co-sponsors on here, I see. I just one question with the. It says 60 days after passage, not right off after passage. Take a on line 20. It just says this act shall take effect 60 days after passage. Why the 60 days?
It's fairly standard for legislative activity, and that's what OLS chose, and I didn't see any reason to change it.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, so, there seems to be, absolutely no opposition to this. And everybody that signed up, on this in support. If you want to keep your comments brief, we can move through this process quickly. So with that, Bart? Maybe we can exec it right away if we're lucky. Okay, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Bart Frometh. I am the Chief Executive Officer over at Freedom Energy Logistics, a small energy procurement firm specializing in group net metering based in Auburn, New Hampshire. I had asked Representative Vose over the course of the fall if there might be some legislation to address an issue that one of our customers had that Representative Vose discussed, which was a small hydro, 1 to 5 megawatt hydro dam that lost 3 months of revenue as a result of an opt-out notice either getting lost in the mail, not being sent, lost. Usually these are powerhouses that are unmanned, where the mailbox is. So it sparked a situation which now there's litigation pending between the hydro owner and the other parties involved. And because we don't have anything under statute in terms of what happens in these situations, where really it could be argued that there's no party at fault. This is just an inadvertent accidental enrollment. We're hoping that something can get on the books to easily remedy this situation going forward.
Well done. Questions? Seeing none.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. I think it's Dean Dennis or Dina? Dina. Sorry, Dina. You're going to have to do it like in big crayons for me, okay? All right.
Yeah, Mr. Kaspari did the writing this
All
morning. Good morning, Chairman Abard and members of the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to be with you today. For the record, I'm Dina Dennis. I'm Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs for the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, CPCNH for short. Also with me is Dr. Jackson Kaspari, PhD, Director of Member Services for the coalition. I just want to iterate that we appreciate Representative Vose bringing this bill forward. The coalition, or CPCNH, supports House Bill 1742 as amended by the House. We think it's practical, timely, and it establishes needed and clear protections for net metered customers. I'll just briefly highlight 3 points that I'd like to share with you today. And as mentioned by Representative Vose, this bill addresses a real recurring problem caused by incomplete or inaccurate utility data. Because of that inaccurate utility data, CPCNH has experienced this problem on a number of occasions where we've launched and some of these net meter customers have been inadvertently enrolled. So my second point is, because we learned that the utilities were not able to supply us with this data before we first launched our aggregation programs in the spring of 2023, CPCNH deliberately chose not to enroll most net metered customers. And because of these structural market barriers, many of which persist to this day. And that decision came down to 2 foundational issues. First, the utilities cannot provide us with granular export data for these net meter generators, which is required to calculate bill credits for the exported energy. Second, even if we had the data, the net exports from customers do not count toward our wholesale load obligation, meaning we would still be required to purchase power from the ISO New England market as if those net metered exports did not exist. And that's not just a problem for CPCNH. It applies to all competitive suppliers in the state. And that's why we took this cautious approach of excluding those customers from the opt-out enrollment. And third, I just want to leave the committee with a different perspective. Is we think that the current net metering construct in New Hampshire is suboptimal. But this bill is a small but important step toward fixing it. And the reason why we think the current net metering construct is suboptimal and could be improved is that the costs and benefits are socialized across all utility customers, regardless of who actually supplies their power. So for example, in Eversource's territory, where most of the state's net meter generation is located, all suppliers get a small allocation of the benefits of net metering, even if their customers didn't produce any of it. Likewise, all utility distribution customers, regardless of their supplier, pay for net metering through unavoidable charges like the stranded cost recovery charge. CPC&H believes there's a better way to do this, and with a few targeted market reforms, such as giving suppliers access to price signals and fixing load settlement practices, we think that distributed energy programs could be delivered on a competitive basis, where costs and benefits are assigned based on who actually causes them. That would be fair, more transparent, and more efficient. And in the meantime, House Bill 1742 is a necessary safeguard. It reinforces the intent of the state's municipal and county aggregation law and the PUC's aggregation rules. It protects consumers, and it helps ensure that net metered customers don't unintentionally lose value of their investments due to deficiencies in utility data systems. So for these reasons, the coalition urges the committee to recommend House Bill 1742 ought to pass with the amendment from the House.
I'm just here to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Sir Elliott, you're our final speaker.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs, the Department of Energy. I think it's pretty clear from folks who testified before me about the intent of the bill and what it does. Unfortunately, I'm going to need the fly in the ointment and point out that there is an amendment that needs to be made. So if you're looking at lines 13 through 17, as it's reading through, retroactively applying net metering credits, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm at the end of line 14 with the comma, with such credits based on the applicable net metering tariff in effect during the period of inadvertent disenrollment. That could be interpreted to exclude NEM 1.0 customers, where they may be inadvertently disenrolled. The plain reading of the statute would imply that they would then get shifted over to NEM 2.0, which I don't believe was the intent of this bill. So we would just suggest adding in after the word effect on line 15, the phrase for the customer generator. So this would ensure that whatever tariff that they were on prior to disenrollment is the same tariff that they're placed back onto afterwards.
Josh, what's the word before the what generator?
I'm sorry, could you?
Customer generator?
Yes, yes. So line 15 would read, or starting into line of 14 with the clause, with such credits, let me just make sure I'm in the right spot here, with such credits based on the applicable net metering tariff in effect for the customer generator during the period of inadvertent disenrollment. So I believe that would clarify that if you're on NEM 1.0, you go back to NEM 1.0. If you're on NEM 2.0, you go back to NEM 2.0.
I see the teacher. Senator?
Okay, now I have a question.
Yes.
I understand that the enrollment was inadvertent, but on line 15, we're saying the disenrollment is also inadvertent. But from what I've heard previous speakers say, the disenrollment was not inadvertent. Like they wanted to get out of this because they couldn't qualify for the credits. So I'm just wondering about inadvertent disenrollment.
So the rest of the clause, inadvertent disenrollment from the utility default energy service. So the inadvertent, I think the statute's clear in that case, right? People have been using the word disenroll, right? They're disenrolled from, they want to be disenrolled from the aggregator. So this is just referring to disenrollment from utility default service.
Okay. Thank you.
So I suppose you could
Seems reverse, but that's the way.
I know it's counterintuitive, but I believe it has the intended effect.
Further discussion? Any further questions? In the 60 days, that's all right. I mean,
I would, if the utilities have any objection to that, I would defer to them. But from the agency standpoint, we don't have a strong opinion.
okay. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we're going to,
Let's do it.
Ms. Locata, did you sign it? Oh. No worries. And you are a final speaker.
Yeah, I'll be extremely brief. I think all the speakers previous, Michael Licata with Eversource, did a good job describing the need. We also have what we hope is a friendly, small amendment on line 16 of the bill. It says any credits from energy exported more than 3 months prior to the customer notifying the utility shall not be recoverable. We think that it would be best if that was consistent with the previous sentence, which allows for up to 4 monthly billing cycles prior to the effective enrollment. So having both of those be the number 4 would provide consistency. So that's the amount of, the second one is the amount of time required for notification. Again, just having alignment there, we think would be,
So how do we word that?
just strike 3 and put in 4 on line 17, on line 16.
Just put in 4 months
Correct.
prior, so 4 months prior.
Yes,
Okay.
that's it. And I'll,
Makes sense.
okay,
Any questions? Seeing none.
thank you.
Thank you. We're going to close the hearing. Is there a motion to move into executive? Senator Waters, seconded by Senator Pearl. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
I move what to pass,
Seconded by Senator Avard.
move a committee amendment.
Committee amendment on,
So do you have it?
I do.
Josh? We'll watch you talk.
Josh, do you have?
After applicable net metering, we want to say.
After effect for the customer generator during the period of inadvertent disenrollment. Right after the word effect for the customer generators. Yeah, and online,
Changing 3 months to 4 months.
Right.
correct.
I'll second if it hasn't been.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And you want to pass it amended? Second.
Seconded by Senator Pearl. Discussion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none. Consent by Senator Waters. Seconded by Senator Rosenwald. All in favor of consent?
Aye.
Aye. Senator Hockey, would you like to take this one out?
I'd love to.
Okay, absolutely. All right. All right.
Motion to come out of exec?
Seconded by Senator Everard. All in favor of motion to move out? And any opposed? Seeing none. We are back into session. Back into the saddle. Okay. So we're going to hear from the prime sponsor of HB 1620. Right?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of ENR. I'm Representative Peter Bixby, representing Dover, Stratford 13, and ranking member of House Environment and Agriculture. HB 1620 was brought to us by Representative Perez, and she had been alerted by a constituent to the issue of underground oil storage, heating oil storage tanks, and brought us a bill that would have required the removal of those in certain circumstances. And the testimony from the DES Oil Remediation Division was that they were neutral on the bill, but they said that the bill did address a couple of places in law that were essentially where things were not covered, and we thought that it would make sense to make sure that those were covered. The bill, as it came to us, was not. Did not do the job properly. I worked with Mr. Bishop from DES to get the language into shape, and what the bill does now is it creates definition for residential heating oil underground storage tank, which was not previously in law, and it requires removal of underground store of those underground heating oil tanks that are no longer in service, and the indication that something is no longer in service is that if a change in the heating system removes it from use, or if the owner does not intend to use it in the future. The mechanisms for that removal are laid out in fire code already. So this references the section of fire code that where the rules for that are. And in some cases, the tank might be in a situation where its actual removal would cause structural problems if it's like buried underneath a building. And in that case, there are procedures in fire code for removing it from usability by filling it with an inert substance after it has been drained, and that would take into play. That would happen if the if there were a structural reason that it couldn't happen, and if it's discovered that oil had been discharged from the underground tank prior to its removal, then that needs to be dealt with under existing statutes for dealing with contaminated soil around a tank. And the bill also requires that when there is a transfer of property, that part of the paperwork that goes along with the transfer of property and that indicates that the existence of an underground tank if such is in place. So that's basically what the bill does. And I think that one of the I think you're probably aware of this, but the cost of cleaning up after an oil spill from a leaking underground tank is way higher than the cost of removing it. And we also have in the oil remediation program a fund that helps us, that helps homeowners for whom that would be financially difficult pay for that. I think that we just raised that cap at your request last year. So
I serve on that fund disbursement board, and this will work.
Okay, so that's basically what this bill is about. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I believe that Mr. Bishop is also here if there's something that is beyond my scope.
Senator McConkey.
Thank you, Representative. Nice to see you. Is it the odd fund that you're referring to for the remediation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there a financial requirement to that? Because I did not believe that you had to be financially qualified to use that fund.
I don't know the details, but I believe that Senator Water might.
You do? I'm sorry, you have to prove a low income threshold to access those funds? And could I ask another question,
You may.
Mr. Chairman? I don't know whom
Absolutely.
I will go.
Well, not entirely. Depends on what we're doing. If it's a homeowner, but there are commercial ones.
Yes, yes, no,
There's a lot of flexibility there. We want to help people out when we can, so.
So in some cases, talking of structural, that being able to fill the tank with certain materials, is that also an option?
Yes.
Other tanks there?
Section 2.
No,
Yeah.
I heard that it was only structural. Could that also be an option for a residential buried tank if it's filled in place?
Maybe Mr. Price will be able to.
Okay, so
answer that in more detail, but
so the intent is that if the tank is accessible, then it should be removed, and because one of the things that we also want if there's a chance that it has been leaking already, we want to detect that if possible, and if we remove the tank, it becomes very clear if there's leaked oil around it, and then that could be remediated. In the case where it is structurally impossible to remove the tank, the cost of detecting whether it's been leaking is astronomical, because basically you'd pretty much have to remove the tank in order to get a real assessment of whether there had been a leak around it. So in that case, in that case, this is also a very low probability situation. So there are very, very few tanks where it's under the building in a place where it is structurally impossible to remove it. So that it's a matter of sort of a risk benefit analysis on that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. They, if we were going to rate an underground fuel tank being gasoline, petroleum versus oil, this is a lower threshold, but any contamination in the groundwater is a serious issue to, especially my area where we have private wells. Is this a problem that was alerted by the department that this isn't happening? Is this something that's,
So
I want to know why we
the particular I'm forgetting the details of the particular situation that that was pointed out to us by Representative Perez, but it was a constituent who had an issue with an existing underground heating oil tank that and there needed to be some authority to make sure that that was removed as part of a real estate transfer.
Fine. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trying to understand why, I understand why we don't want oil leaking. But I'm trying to understand why draining a tank that you don't plan to use again, or buying a house with a tank that's already empty, isn't good enough. And why we want the homeowner to have to go through the additional expense of removing an empty tank.
So there are two elements there. One is making sure that the tank has not been leaking. The second is that if there is infrastructure in place for that tank, sometime if there's a change in oil delivery companies, there may be two fill tubes or fill pipes that and it might not be immediately apparent to the new oil delivery company which one is correct, and they could then end up filling a tank that is no longer in use, and that would be problematic. If you're going to ask that the infrastructure for filling be removed, then you really want to make sure that the tank is removed as well. And also, it is not always clear that the tank has been emptied. So you want to make if there's a situation where you have a transfer of property, there's an underground oil tank on the property, the new owner does not intend to use that again. You want to make sure that the tank has in fact been emptied and properly dealt with, and having the residue. An empty tank is not completely empty of all sorts of residue. So if that gradually rusts over time, then you're going to have a certain amount of the nastiest stuff that builds up at the bottom of an oil tank then being released into the environment. So, the best way to deal with them is to remove them.
Any further questions? Seeing none? And nobody want to sign up on this? Senator?
Thank you. Is it possible to have the department come forward so I can just ask a question? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, department.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Robert Bishop. I'm the administrator of the Oil Remediation and Compliance Bureau at the Department of Environmental Services.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. So the ODD fund is a robust fund, has monies in it. I have a gas facility. We pay into it all the time. and it's been wonderful to get our underground storage tanks taken care of. Can you tell me what the residential, so if I'm a commercial operation, I've been doing all my proper record keeping and I'm a good boy, and we find that there is a spill from a tank, an old tank, not our responsibility. There's a threshold that a business will pay in. I can't remember if it's $10,000, whatever that is, the first amount. Now, if these people during the sale, it's found that there's an underground tank, and I just want to make sure that that homeowner is not under a financial burden, a financial threshold. If they make X amount of money, the odd fund's going to kick in. I want to be assured that the odd fund is going to kick in to help. And do you know what that residential cost is?
Yes, so for the odd fund, which is an excess insurance fund, that means that no insurance exists or it's been denied, then a homeowner or residential heating oil release has a $500 deductible to access the fund. And then there is a $500,000 cap to the amount of reimbursement that can go. And now that is for corrective action, which is the cleanup of released oil. But we have an underground storage tank that is on that property and it hasn't released, but it needs to be removed. The fund won't pay for that. And that's a compliance issue that the homeowner would have to pay for the removal of that tank. Now, that is where the low income piece comes in, because we do have our Safe Tank program, which one will provide replacement tanks for lower income households. And then two will pay for the removal up to $4,500 of an underground storage tank.
If I could, my ears aren't what they were 50 years ago. Did you say that that they were not eligible? They're eligible at a $500 deductible if there was a spread of contamination. Did you say that it's not available to them as a removal?
Well, for all homeowners, it is available to them to clean up the contaminated soil, the release of oil. It's not available for the removal of the tank if they just want that tank to come out, unless they're low income. That's a separate part of the program that pays for that removal of the tank. But the cleanup of any spill is covered by that fund with just a $500 deductible. And that is applicable to all homeowners.
If I could, what would it take in your opinion to change that regulation? So if this bill were to be mandated that residence, that homeowner could have that tank removed for no more than $500 at their cost?
That would take a statutory change to RSA 146D to change the criteria for who can access it, the Safe Tank portion of the fund. So this is for a non-leaking tank that we're now talking about, that to come out of the ground.
If I could, I understand that, but if I understand this correctly, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong, it happens all the time. We're going through a sale and it's disclosed during your list of work with realtors every day of the week. And so now, do you have an underground tank? Yes. So they're kicked in at that point to remove that tank. And my concern is that I don't know that it's a cost that should be for a tank that's not leaking.
Right, so that would take a change to the statute for the odd fund in order to bring in different eligibility criteria for somebody to access the fund to just pay for the removal of a tank.
Thank you, sir.
Is there a number of these underground, obviously people have to notify that they have an underground tank. How many's in the state?
First, they do not have to notify
Oh, they
that
don't?
there is an underground tank. And we don't know how many are in the state, but it's a fairly small number in comparison to the above ground storage tanks. So we know when we have to go respond to a spill from one of these tanks, and we respond to anywhere between 60 and 100 leaking oil tanks per year, residential tanks. And a handful of those, probably less than 5, are actually underground storage tanks.
So, if we were to, in line with Senator McConkey's questioning, add some extra language which would make it so that you remove them upon request, that would be a huge fiscal impact, right?
I believe it would be. I don't know the number of underground storage tanks out there, but I believe it would be. And we would want to determine what sort of impact that would have on the fund.
So maybe at a later time, we can address that.
I think something might be at the time.
Senator Waters first, and
Yeah,
then Senator.
I would just to comment, since I serve on the board, let's work on something over the summer on that aspect, see what we could do. But I don't think that, I mean, in a sense, would it be fair to say that that other issue really needs some serious consideration, but that this bill in itself actually, passing this may not have actually any kind of impact that would be adverse, that we would want to wait on this to pass, to do something else about the fund?
I don't believe that passing this would have any adverse financial impact either on a homeowner or the oil fund. And particularly because this is reinforcing and just making more clearly what is already in existence in fire code. And in fire code, if you have a tank that's out of service, you're required to remove it. And so that already exists, and this just makes it more clear into the scenario of when you have to remove
Well,
it.
if I could follow up, and isn't it the case that the complexity of the finances of the Oil Fund Disbursement Board is related to the fact that it is funded by a certain amount that is placed on the importation of fuels, and that we very carefully kind of calculate what that rate is so that we can sustain the fund with its outflows. So if we're going to make a change, we'd have to be very careful as to the financial impact.
That is correct. And just last year, legislation was passed that renewed the odd fund for another 10 years, and it rebalanced the individual fees on individual types of oil, heating oil being one of its own categories, gas and diesel is another category, motor oil, and then all other oils. And so the idea for the board and the review of rebalancing those fees was that the fees for the individual oils would pay for releases related to their impact.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald?
Thank you. Following up on Senator McConkey's line of questioning, am I correct that you don't see this increasing the draw on the oil fund? In which case, I would have expected a fiscal note.
That is correct. I do not see this increasing the draw on the oil fund.
Thank you.
Senator Pearl?
Good morning. Wouldn't it be possible for the department to sort of, without us putting together a study committee, to just kind of put together a number or give us an estimate of what you think it might cost, if, what the impact would be on the odd fund if we were to do something like this? I mean, I could certainly bring that at our next meeting and ask that question if we want to. Is it possible, do you think, for the department to give us at least a ballpark number?
Yes, the department could do research and determine a ballpark number. It may be difficult to identify the exact number of underground storage tanks that exist. I think going back in history, a lot of these tanks were put in the ground and they weren't designed for that purpose. They just went in the ground to put them out of the way, much like propane tanks often go in the ground. This doesn't apply to propane tanks at all. And so we could do that and do some research and determine what the impact would be. And this is only for those tanks being taken out of service. So it's not, if you have a tank, you have to remove it. So I would imagine it would be fairly low.
Could you take that back and see that makes it on the agenda for the next meeting?
I can.
I would
Yes.
ask Jennifer, but she's not there now, so I don't know who to ask.
Definitely. I'm the one to ask.
You're the one there. All right. Can you please make sure that gets on our agenda for our next meeting?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
Senator, I will speak on this, but in deference to the chair, he'd like to speak first.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Chairman, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning again, everyone. Representative Michael Vose, Chair of Science, Technology, and Energy, representing Rockingham 5. I'm here this morning to give you some background on how House Bill 1733 came to exist in its current form. So this bill passed the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee 18-0, and was placed on the consent calendar, passed the House on the consent calendar. The House amendment that resulted in the bill that you see before you here today never had a public hearing. And the reason for that is we had two different bills on this subject introduced last year. One by a member of the Democratic caucus and one by a member of the Republican caucus. So there was fairly broad consensus about the basic issue that this bill addresses, and that's recovery of under collections of default service charges via a non-bypassable charge. We wanted to make sure that nobody could do that. And so we had two bills that tried to do that. Well, after we heard both bills, we decided, well, why don't we just combine them together? And so we asked Representative Tom Corman to put together the amendment that resulted in the final bill that you see here today. But as I said, that amendment never really had a public hearing. Nevertheless, we passed it because we thought that it did pretty much what we all wanted it to do. And it passed the House, as I said, on the consent calendar. So that's how it got to you folks. In the interim, I personally have had conversations with two PUC commissioners who have convinced me that some of the language in the bill as it exists today is not necessarily advantageous to the state. I refer specifically, if you look at the bill, to lines 6 through 10. The sentence that starts with any such means and ends with compensate for any deficiency, that sentence basically prohibits utilities from acquiring electricity from the day ahead or spot market. And that is what the Public Utilities Commission objects to. They think that that takes away a potentially valuable tool for us to use to lower electricity rates. So at the very least, I'm here this morning to recommend that if the Senate moves forward with this bill, that they remove that sentence entirely.
From line 6 to line 10.
The one sentence that starts with any such means and ends with compensate for any deficiency. Now, as Representative Harrington will discuss in a few minutes, there have been other discussions with the Department of Energy, with the governor's office, and it may be the case that this bill isn't necessary at all. And Representative Harrington will go through that case with you. In that situation, it may be wise for the committee to decide to place this bill into interim study because there, as Representative Harrington will explain, there are a lot of activities going on related to this subject that may contribute to its being premature at the moment. So That is why I wanted to speak first on this issue, was to give you folks the background on how we got to where we are with this bill and what we think you might want to do with it going forward. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. Representative Harrington will follow me and we'll have some additional comments to make about the bill.
Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Vogt. So I'd just soon lay out a couple of thoughts and then you can respond relating to the proposed deletion of that sentence. We have a letter from the consumer advocate with a full-throated endorsement of the bill as written. Because, and you know, we know this from the beginning of Community Power Coalition, there's been a feeling that the Public Utilities Commission has in some, I mean, I'll just use the wordings, in some ways undermined the success of Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire by kind of insisting that it move to the spot market, which could escalate its costs considerably, that's been a kind of a dispute in the in the PUC over that. And so the bill in some ways says, look, you can go out and get the best deal, and it may be that in one given night or something, you don't go out, that it might have saved a little bit of money to go out into the spot market, but overall, given the volatility of gas prices particularly, that this is a tool where they would have the option. And I think wouldn't you at least agree there's a philosophical disagreement over whether or not the PUC's position or the Community Power Coalition's position is better, but that there has been a feeling that the PUC has been kind of hamstringing Community Power Coalition over this, and that's why we need legislative clarification. Comment as you wish.
Thank you, Senator. You're right. There is a lot of controversy about whether a utility providing what is essentially last resort service should be acquiring that load via markets that could put it at risk or put its customers at risk for higher and volatile energy prices. As a matter of fact, in the utility industry, it's fairly common knowledge that that kind of risk-taking is inappropriate. What the PUC has been trying to determine, and which you will hear in a few minutes, is an investigation that's happening right now at DOE, is whether or not the risk mitigation factor that's built into wholesale supplier costs has gotten to the point where it almost requires a way to reduce that mitigation in order to have an opportunity to reduce costs. And so prohibiting the utilities from being able to do these day-ahead or spot market purchases would eliminate a tool. And that's what the PUC is saying. We need more investigation to figure out if this can be done. Now, the PUC has issued an order that would prohibit the collection of under collections via a non-bypassable charge. So we know that they're not inclined to do that. We also know that an order can be reversed. So that might be a logical requirement that we put this language into statute to prevent that from happening in the future. And I wouldn't oppose that, but I do think we shouldn't take away the tool of allowing the utilities to make those spot market purchases if it's advantageous to do so. Now, we just went through a very cold winter, and we know, those of us who've been watching the ISO New England daily market prices, we know that the prices have been extremely high, especially in January and February. So when August rolls around and the utilities finally have to tell us just what kind of under or over collections they may have made during the previous 6 months, we'll know exactly what the impact of this fairly severe winter has been on those spot market purchases that they made and day-ahead purchases they made. So that's why an interim study motion might be appropriate here. Let's wait and see just how bad or how mild that process will be with regard to future rates for ratepayers. I think others behind me may argue that that's a reasonable course of action to take and one that I would support as well.
On line 7, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think we need some legislative direction to the PUC, but there it is. On line 7, would you at least think about it reading, commercial customers shall involve, when reasonable, the use of fixed price contracts instead of purchases? So I think the reasonableness standard is what we use. I don't think that would slam the door in either direction. So we will get rid of the word only. So it would read, commercial customers shall involve, when reasonable, the use of fixed price contracts instead of purchases. And that way, it still would be in the PUC, but we would have said as a legislative body that we think this can make sense, and the case for reasonableness would then have to be made by folks.
I understand your intent by adding that language, but I don't think that that does what you think it should do. Because if you read the earlier part of the sentence, it says, any such means for residential and small commercial customers shall involve
When reasonable.
only the use of fixed price
Only
contracts.
the word only is gone.
I just don't see that will make that much of a difference. I think it's, at the very least, it's prudent to remove that sentence entirely. And you could pass the rest of the bill if you so choose, while we await further information from both the PUC and the DOE on this question.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Harrington. It's very unusual for me to see 3 X's in the middle. Ambivalence, one way or the other.
Representative
Especially
Mike
from the prime
Harrington,
sponsor.
Stratford 18. I'm on the Science and Tech Committee as well. The big thing about this bill is, Chairman Vose said, is that it was put together and we really didn't have all the normal public hearings on it. And I think we missed a few things because of that. The biggest thing is I've been informed by the Department of Energy that they're looking into a comprehensive study on this exact issue. What's the best way to set default service rates? Should they try to be competitive? Should they try to be conservative? Where's the fine line? Is it limiting going into the markets at 15%? Is that the sweet spot? Or is it 20% or 30%? That's ongoing. And I think before we put out more controls, we ought to get the results of that study. Also, as Chairman Bowles said, we just experienced, I think, the coldest winter in 20 years. So this is going to be probably the largest impact on most likely under collection of rates during the winter, which will be a true-up period, which under the existing PUC rule can only be collected from default service customers. I'll get back to that in a second because that's a little technical issue. But the real issue here is the first couple of lines of this bill and the law that already exists. Restructuring policy positions, notwithstanding any provision of subparagraph B and C. As competitive markets develop, the Commission may approve alternative means of providing transition or default services which are designed to minimize customer risk and not unduly harm the development of competitive markets. That, and then it goes on to say, and mitigate against price volatility without creating new deferred cost. That's the part that we're trying to put some meat on the bones to say exactly what that means, because that's the real key issue here. I mean, you can say, if you wanted to take it as this bill was written, which is, okay, default service is a service of last resort. It's minimized risk. How do you minimize risk? Well, you have fixed price contracts. People that sign up for default service know exactly how much they're going to pay. And they say, okay, my rate's going to be whatever, 12 cents a kilowatt hour for energy. And they're going to pay that for the next 6 months. They know it. The way we work right now is after 6 months, the utility can come back and say, well, 12 cents was a little bit low. We should have been charging you 14. So now we're going to put on a surcharge of 2 cents a kilowatt hour, and you're going to have to pay that. And the reaction to that is not going to be good from customers. They're going to be bull crap, okay? I mean, they're going to be up and down. No, I already paid for the bill. I mean, I go buy groceries. You can't send me a bill 3 months later and saying, oh, the steak you bought last month, we're going to charge you an extra $1 for now. So that's one issue. And the other issue, of course, is if you're going to collect that from a it's not going to be a non-bypassable charge, which means it's coming from default service rates. Anyone who's a little bit, as we say, knowledgeable of the markets can say, okay, I get default service rates. I'll just use this fiction 12 cents. And now you're telling me I'm going to have to pay an extra 2 cents a kilowatt hour for the next 6 months because it was undercollected. Easy as pie. I'm going to go get to a competitive supplier. And I'll go to a competitive supplier and I won't pay that money back because as it is right now, it can only be collected from those on default service. I don't think there's a mechanism, and this is why I say I don't think there's a mechanism where the PUC could say, well, for previous default service customers during this time frame, we're going to put something on your distribution charge because you actually owe money because you underpaid during the last 6 months. That's another technicality that needs to be worked out. So I think what's here is, I really think we need more time on this, whether it's an interim study or bring the bill back next year. But we really want to look at what's the definition we're trying to accomplish here. These competitive markets, what does it mean? What does the low risk mean? Because that's what we've said is the purpose of this, but then we're going down and we're changing it as we go along. So the DOE study is going to be obviously something that we want to see. We don't want to put something out now and then 3, 4, 5 months from now it comes out and says, oh, well, you know, if you went with, I'm making up a number again, 15% in the real-time markets, that would be the optimum towards minimizing risk, but also keeping costs down for default service customers. I don't know what that number is, but I really don't want to endorse a bill that could be contradicted by a definitive study being done by the DOE. So for that reason, I think the best thing to do here is, I don't know if interim study is appropriate or just we bring the bill back next year. But I think the PUC already has a rule about the non-bypassable charge. I don't see them changing that. This is a very complicated issue. I spent the last couple of days, I had, pages of emails from a PUC commissioner and pages of email from community power people, all advocating good positions, all coming to a different conclusion. So I really think this needs more work, and I would recommend probably just don't do anything with the bill, let it die, and we can, hopefully it'll be brought back next year, and I'll take any questions that you have.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. So I guess I'm wondering why the House sent it to us.
Well, at the time, we weren't, number one, we weren't aware of the DOE study. As Chairman Bowles had said, this came together without a public hearing because this was like sort of universal agreement between the Democrats and the Republicans on the committee. And, I still haven't necessarily given up on the principle that competitive markets the default service should be low risk and not interfere with competitive markets. But we need to define that further. We didn't have that. I didn't know of the DOE study. And my understanding is it's a pretty comprehensive study that's going to be done. And I would want the results of that. And just from a more practical matter, we'll also have the results of what happened during the winter when August comes and we have, presumably, there's going to be utilities will say, well, we had an undercollection. We're going to have to put on some type of a surcharge going forward. So knowing both of those would give us much better way to go forward. And it's also a philosophical policy decision. And I discussed this with the governor's office, and they said they're happy with just waiting, not passing anything now, and coming back when we have more information. Because that first 2 lines of the bill is really comes out, what exactly do we want to do to implement that? In the past, it's almost always been fixed price contracts. Now, over the last few years, the PUC is trying to come up, can we lower default service? And they've gone up to, I believe 50% is now being bought in the day ahead and real-time markets, and the rest is fixed price. Fixed price contracts are lower risk, but they're almost always going to cost you more money because of the fact that there's a risk premium built into it. So instead of the ratepayer taking the risk, the supplier to the utility is taking the risk. They say, I'll give you all the electricity that you need at this fixed price. And if it turns out, if it's a mild winter and things go well, no one starts any wars in Ukraine, then maybe they make out quite well. But on the other hand, if those prices skyrocket for various reasons, then they eat the difference. So that's what makes it, is a low risk factor. And the question is, how much risk do we want to expose default service customers to? And how much should they be worried about, well, I have to keep up with the competitive market prices. And, because there are people that just go into default service. So.
Oh, thank you. So am I to understand that DOE did not tell your Science, Technology, and Energy Committee that they were doing a study on this topic?
I wasn't aware that they were doing it, but this was done over a pretty quick period of time when this bill came together with the amendments. And like I said, there was no public hearing. So because of that, there wasn't an announcement for them to come. I'm sure if we had a public hearing on it, they would have showed up and said that. The level of cooperation we've had with DOE and the committee has been very, very good.
Thank you.
I'll take any questions.
See, no further questions. Thank you, Art. You explained
Okay.
it very well.
Bye-bye.
Representative, appreciate it. Henry? And I'm assuming you've seen the amended version, right, that we're talking about? Push your button.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Henry Herndon. I am the Executive Director of the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. And we are a nonprofit power supply company that is created and owned and controlled by 68 New Hampshire cities, towns, and counties. And we provide default power supply to the customer base within many of those communities for about 180,000 retail electric customers. I very much appreciate some of the context and discussion from the members of House Science, Tech, and Energy, and I'll perhaps elaborate on some of that and provide some additional information. I am here to testify in support of House Bill 1733 and continue the discussion. So this bill, I think, as has been discussed, it's about what is market fairness. What does the language of the statute mean when it says utility default service is designed to minimize customer risk, not unduly harm the development of competitive markets, and mitigate against price volatility without creating new deferred costs. So those are the 4 things that are in existing law that we're sort of deviating with spot market purchasing, which I think is the genesis of this proposed legislation. And, it's about market fairness and about addressing cost shifting in sort of 2 forms. I think sounds like there's universal agreement that costs should not be shifted from the supply rate into the stranded cost charge. So I'm pleased to hear that. But then there's this second question, and it is an interesting, perhaps, policy discussion of what about shifting costs 1 or 2 years into the future onto customers through the supply charges when the proxy rate doesn't necessarily collect or the costs in the spot market or reflect those actual costs. So at its core, this is a question of customers and markets needing accurate price signals to function. And when rates don't reflect the actual cost of power supply, customers aren't really saving money. We're just moving costs onto future customers, as has been discussed with some of the potential under collections we are currently seeing and may see more of from the winter. So I also am interested to hear that there's going to be a Department of Energy study, because less than 2 years ago, the Department of Energy studied this issue and published a report. So I'll just refer the committee to Investigation 2023-001, Department of Energy Procurement Investigation, with a final report dated March 29th, 2024. So I'm not sure if members of the committee or otherwise were familiar with this, but it sounds like there was a study within the past 2 years, and maybe there'll be another study. So I'll be curious to hear about that. But just to read some of the findings from the study that was produced by Department of Energy and consultants, there was the conclusion that most markets for default supply rely on fixed price contracts precisely to avoid risks and volatility, some of which we're starting to see play out. And I'll just read a number of the recommendations from the DOE study on this. One, do not adopt self-supply procurement methods except in contingency circumstances. Number two, continue to assign responsibility for meeting energy market requirements to the wholesale suppliers, most equipped to manage those risks. Three, do not change the current approach to procuring fixed price contracts for small customers. And four, minimize reconciliation costs to the maximum extent possible, and when such costs apply, pass them on to customers as close to their occurrence as feasible. So that's from the recent DOE study of this topic. And then I'll just speak briefly to an example. So this month, Liberty Utilities proposed a mid-period default rate increase, adding about $0.01 to their small customer rate for May through July 2026. That mid-period rate bump is to recover half of an $8 million loss from 2024 into August of 2025. So costs are showing up in Liberty rates currently in spring 2026 that represent about half of an undercollection from 8 to 18 months ago. So again, I think we're all closely monitoring. We participate in the markets and we experience firsthand the high costs in January, as did many of the suppliers. But it will be interesting to see that play out in the current rates that are likely to not recover all of those costs. And then just one other note in sort of these dynamic markets. The governor, to her credit, had called out this new ISO market mechanism. There's this new ancillary charge, the Day Ahead Ancillary Services Initiative. And Governor Kelly-Ayotte is exactly right. This is something that started in March of last year, and the ISO forecast that it might add about $140 million to the regional market, all 6 states. And then 11 months in, we see the actual being over $920 million. So we're approaching $1 billion cost overrun from a new ISO market mechanism. And this is just one indicator that, this could exacerbate some of the shifting of costs into the future when we move to the spot market approaches. So again, I think this is a very interesting policy discussion and appreciate efforts to find ways to create affordability for customers. But I think those are some important considerations. We'll pause there and be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
So the study that you referred to, is that the exact same study that has been, Representative Harrington referred to, the new study? They're two different studies, correct?
I can't speak to the one that's been proposed. I was not familiar with that. But in 2024, the Department of Energy published a study assessing should the regulators and utilities move to spot market, and they found no, that they should not.
Right. It's my understanding that the study is different, so I'm not sure how that comes into play here. We'll hear from the department after. Questions from the committee? Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Catherine? You know what? Catherine doesn't want to speak because it says doesn't want to speak, but in favor. I can't read the last name. Heidi didn't want to speak either. Okay. Rep. Corman? Oh, what's that? I'll wave off. You'll wave off? Okay. Thank you. Bart?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, my name is Bart Frommuth with Freedom Energy Logistics. We represent 6 active aggregations throughout the state of New Hampshire. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I am here today in strong support of HB 1733 because it restores prudent, risk-averse default service procurement standards and corrects a recent approach that exposed small customers to unnecessary risk, damaged the competitive supply marketplace, and created the possibility of inappropriate cost recovery. I'd like to focus on 3 core points. First, risk-averse procurement would have substantially lowered winter costs. For decades, New Hampshire's default service for residential and small commercial customers has been procured using fixed price.
Can you just push your mic just away a little bit? Just push it away a little bit.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Getting loud.
Has been procured using fixed price, fully hedged contracts over defined 6-month periods. That structure exists for a simple reason. Small customers are not equipped to manage wholesale market risk. A few years ago, the Public Utilities Commission approved a departure from those long-standing practices by allowing 50% default service load to rely on forecasted spot market pricing, including exposure to day-ahead ancillary service costs. When those costs spiked dramatically in December and January, customers bore the consequences. Had the entire August 1st through January 31st default service period been fully hedged, customers would not have been exposed to those winter price shocks. The market risk would have remained with the suppliers offering the full requirements contracts, exactly as traditional procurement standards intend. HB 1733 reinforces an important principle. Default service should minimize risk for small customers, not speculate on short-term market outcomes. Second, artificial standard offer prices damage competition. The use of forecasted spot market pricing does more than increase volatility. It undermines the competitive supply market. When the standard offer rate is set using speculative forecasts and reconciled after the fact, it can appear artificially low compared to competitive supply offers that must price risk upfront. Competitive suppliers do not have the ability to rely on regulatory reconciliations. They must lock in costs and price accordingly. The results of these spot market forecasts are predictable. Customers are unintentionally misled about the true cost of fixed supply. Competitive suppliers are structurally disadvantaged, and over time, customer choice and market participation erodes. A healthy competitive market requires a neutral and transparent default service benchmark, not one supported by pricing mechanisms unavailable to private suppliers. HB 1733 helps restore that balance. Third, preventing improper cost recovery through non-bypassable charges. HB 1733 also addresses a deeply concerning concept that the Commission has considered in the past, allowing forecast errors or undercollections associated with default service pricing to be recovered from all customers through non-bypassable charges rather than limiting recovery to default service customers. That approach would socialize the consequences of speculative procurement decisions, charge competitive supply customers for costs that they did not cause, and eliminate accountability for default service pricing decisions. If risk is introduced into default service procurement, it must remain with a default service. HB 1733 appropriately draws that line. Finally, the statutory role of the Commission. Current law does not authorize the PUC to take on market risk on behalf of residential and small commercial customers. The Commission's role has always been to be risk averse, not to optimize prices through market forecasting. RSA 374-F3 states, in part, the Commission may approve alternative means of providing default services which are designed to minimize customer risk, not unduly harm the competitive markets, and mitigate against price volatility without creating new deferred costs. The recent 50% spot market exposure represents a fundamental departure from that mandate. HB 1733 realigns default service procurement with both statutory intent and decades of sound regulatory practice. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Bart.
Thank you very much.
David Creer?
We good? Yep. Okay. Great. Thank you. Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. My name is David Creer. I'm the manager of state government affairs covering New England for Constellation Energy. We are the nation's largest independent power producer. We've got about 55 gigawatts of generation assets. And we're also one of the largest competitive suppliers and just suppliers in general in the country. We serve default service loads, residential customers, municipal aggregations, businesses, anything that needs electricity, we will be happy to supply that. We are here in strong support of 1733 as it is currently written. I'm gonna take a little bit of history here. I'll try to do this as quickly and as simply as we can. I understand it gets kind of in the weeds. Last year, the PUC, on their own initiative, ordered the electric distribution companies, the EDCs, to procure half of their default service load from the day-ahead and real-time ISO New England markets, or known as the spot markets. We've talked about that. The issue that we have is that places all of the risk away from suppliers who regularly engage in hedging techniques, and we forecast market. We have very complicated systems for this. We takes all of the risk away from us, puts it right on the ratepayer, essentially putting them on a variable rate without telling them that they're on a variable rate. And the problem with that is that it also then requires the utility to do a reconciliation for any money they've either over or under collected. And as you've heard previously, during this past winter, when electricity rates are typically between, let's say, just say $40 and $80 a megawatt hour, there was a month where they were over $200 a megawatt hour for a month straight. That is a lot of money that is going to have to now be collected from all of these customers, or whoever remains on default service at the time of the reconciliation. And so we understand the impetus behind the PUC order, which was, if we don't pay the suppliers the risk premium, we can save money on rates. That might be true over a 20-year period, but it's kind of like insurance. You have a car, it's cheaper to not have insurance, but I'm willing to bet most people have it because that one time, if they get into a car accident, they just don't have the $40,000, $50,000 to buy a new car, right? So that's why you pay the suppliers that risk premium. The other interesting detail about this is, even though you're not paying the suppliers that risk premium, you pay the utilities interest on carrying debt. So if they have a massive undercollection that needs to be collected over the next 6-month period or the next year, well, that's debt that they've carried, and now they're getting interest for that debt, which does not help them because that's not protecting, that money doesn't go towards helping protect the ratepayer. That's just money that's gone. And I'm not disparaging utilities by any means, by the way. So we do think that this is an extremely important provision. There's a lot of harm that comes from purchasing on the spot market and then doing these reconciliations. And in fact, it like others have mentioned, the law, not only does this plan of procuring on the spot market not follow these 4 things, it does the exact opposite. It increases customer risk. It harms the development of the competitive markets. It increases price volatility, and it creates new deferred costs. It does none of the goals that default service was supposed to accomplish. And that actually does remind me about the development of competitive markets. This was briefly touched on, but I do think it's very important. If there's an undercollection of default service, and so then the following rate period, they need to add that reconciliation to the supply charges, they're going to have a supply charge of 14, 15 cents maybe, and maybe the market is 10, 11 cents. Anyone paying attention who wants to go shop, they'll jump ship. They'll go to a competitive supplier, which I won't complain about as a competitive supplier, but they will go to a competitive supplier and we'll see large migrations to competitive suppliers. But then, well, now maybe they've over-collected. And so their rate is below what a competitive supplier can offer, not because the market is lower, but because they have too much money from a previous period. So now, anyone, again, paying attention, they can go from the competitive suppliers back to default service, creating these large migration swings to and from default service. That makes the market very difficult to hedge and predict which would then increase risk premiums, which is the very thing this thing is trying to avoid, right? It will increase costs for all customers because we are unable to hedge a market that has these rapid swings like that. There's more detail in the written testimony. Happy to answer any questions. I think that's kind of the big swing of it.
So in your statement, you, correct me if I'm wrong, you'd rather have the risk market be on your backs rather than on the customer's back?
Absolutely. Yep. Because we we are sophisticated buyers and sellers of electricity, right? We have entire teams and organizations within our company that their only job is to trade, watch the markets, hedge the markets, do all of these things so that even if like there's a risk there for sure, but we can manage that risk. Whereas as a customer, especially a default service customer, they're not watching the markets. They have no idea what's necessarily going on. I mean, the people in this room are all sophisticated. We all know what happened this winter when prices went above $200 for a month. And I think they got as high as $900, $1,000 for certain periods. We're watching that, but the average customer is probably not watching that. And they're still going to be subject to that cost.
So you can manage the risk
Yes.
to your advantage. But how does that affect the customer's advantage?
Well, because so when we manage that risk so that we're not losing money, we can charge lower rates, right? Like, so if we're not going to be losing money, we don't have to charge a customer as much because we are hedging in other areas of the business. So we can keep rates lower and stable for the customers.
Senator Waters?
So just to kind of highlight the paragraph in your letter, in some ways we're here because the PUC took action to do the 50% that was not explicitly authorized by statute.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions?
You heard that.
I did.
Okay.
Senator Rosenwald, any questions? Okay. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Who do I want next? Mr. Licata, would you like to come up and talk about this a little? Keep in mind, you were not disparaged.
Thank you. Michael Licata representing Eversource. I very much appreciate the opportunity to testify on this and appreciate some of the previous testimony. I think both Representative Vos and Harrington and some of the other speakers did a really good job talking about some of the complexities here. I did check off that we are opposed to the bill as it came over from the House, and I think that's in part due to the dynamic that Representatives Vos and Harrington talked about, where this was presented at an executive committee session. We did offer alternative language to try to get at the same issues with some important differences. Unfortunately, that amendment really wasn't considered. We didn't have an opportunity to delve into the details on it. So I'll just say if the Senate committee would like to move ahead with this legislation, either in total or in parts, as Representative Vos had described, we do have some language that we'd be happy to share, which really contains some important consumer protections that we think are absent from the House bill. So as you heard, the bill really does two different things. The first is, and this has been the focus of a lot of the testimony, it prohibits the direct market procurements that the utilities are currently doing, which was directed by the Public Utilities Commission. And I do think it might, if the chair will allow, just to give a little bit of context on why we're doing that and how we arrived at this. So first and foremost, we're talking about default service. So that's the energy service price. And the utilities do not make any money on this. It is a direct pass through. It is a service we provide to our customers. So we go out to the market, whether that's for a 6-month fixed price contract or currently 50%, we're going out directly to the day ahead market. And we make those purchases on behalf of our customers. The price that we pay is the price that our customers pay. So if a customer wants to move away from utility default service, whether that's to a third-party supplier or an aggregation, there is no financial or operational impact of that on the company, on the utility. So we truly are agnostic if our customers take supply from us or not. So how we got here with the 50% direct market procurements is Ukraine was invaded by Russia in 2022. In February, of 2022, and we saw the wholesale price of electricity go through the roof. In August of that year, all of the utilities went out for our 6-month fixed price default service contracts, and we saw the price correspondingly spike. So for Eversource's case, the price of default service went up to 22.5 cents. That was a 112% increase. And then in the next period, which was the February to August period, it stayed high, 20%. And so the Public Utilities Commission in 2023 decided to conduct an investigation, issued a report looking at ways to try to reduce the cost of default service. And what they were particularly trying to get at was what Mr. Creer talked about, this concept of a risk premium. So again, we were fully hedged. We had a fixed price contract when the Ukraine war started, but then suppliers acted like rational actors, and they built in risk premiums due to that price volatility to cover their losses of the previous period, and that's why we saw those big spikes. So the PUC directed the utilities to go into the market to avoid that risk premium as a savings to customers, and they also directed us how we're supposed to direct that proxy price. So essentially, that is the price that the rate is set at, understanding that no one can predict what the market will do, and there may be an adjustment either if it's too high, that money would go back to customers at the end of the period, or if it's too low, then there would have to be a collection. So that's sort of how we got here, and that's the first part of the bill that would prohibit those direct market purchases. We're neutral on whether or not the legislature wants to step in and say, we don't want utilities doing this. We would rather have what is likely a more expensive but less risky product as default service, or whether you want a more price competitive and but riskier product. So that is a public policy determination of the legislature. The Public Utilities Commission has already weighed in on that. That said, if you do want to move forward with that provision, we do have some language that would have some protections for customers that the House passed version does not have. And that's specifically around a failed procurement and what that means and what the utility should do thereafter. The second part of the bill, which is lines 10 through 16, we do have concerns over that. And that is the prohibition that utilities cannot recover those reconciliations through a non-bypassable charge. As you heard from Representative Harrington, the Public Utilities Commission did in fact act on this. There were two proposals in front of them, one from Unitil, one from Eversource, to spread those costs to all customers, and the PUC determined that they were not in favor of that, and we are not able to do that today. So first and foremost, we think that this is an issue that the Commission has ruled on. And secondly, we are concerned that if this is enshrined into statute, it would take flexibility away in the manner that the bill specifies. It would take flexibility away from the Commission if there are unanticipated issues that come up in the future. And what I would describe there is if a utility were to encumber costs that it then needs to have the ability to reconcile, if customers move en masse away from default service, which they are certainly entitled to do so, then you're limiting the utility's ability to recover those costs, which would have been prudently incurred. So we have language that would allow for a little bit of flexibility while still capturing the essence of that language, again, if the committee wanted to move forward with it. So I'd be happy to take questions. I will say the recommendation from the bill sponsor and the chair of ST&E to perhaps interim study this bill, we think that would also be a good avenue to go down as well, because we do believe that the language in front of you has some issues.
Senator Waters.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm seeing the argument for interim study, so fine, but could you very, very briefly sketch out what you would have proposed as an alternative to lines 6 to 10?
6 to 10, yes. I'm happy to pass it around. Essentially,
I mean, we'll if we're going to interim study, we'll get to it. I just want a couple of words on it, really.
Yeah. So the crux of the issue is the language before you is a little unclear on the failed procurement. So there are sort of, in our mind, two versions of a failed procurement. One is you don't receive any bids at all, or partial bids, and the legislation before you, as passed by the House, seems to cover that. The second piece is, what if you get an unreasonable bid back? What if we go out and it's 30 cents, 40 cents a kilowatt hour, and the bill doesn't contemplate that? And so in that instance, what we would propose is, if it is an unreasonable rate, there's a safety valve that would allow the utility to go into the market.
That's why I was toying around with the reasonable word earlier, but if we work on it, we'll work on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald.
Yeah. Could you please tell me when the last time your utility gave over-collected money and lowered its rate for consumers?
So I believe I would have to go back and look at each of the procurements. I would note this is a fairly new initiative or procurement policy by the Public Utilities Commission. By and large, to date, it has saved customers money. If you look at the price of procurement in the market compared to the fixed price contract that we got from the suppliers, it has been lower. I have to look specifically, the question that you're asking is, has it been lower than that proxy price? Or excuse me, has it been lower than the proxy price and money had to go back? That I'll have to check, and I'm more than happy to provide it back to you. As was previously said, we did see extremely high market prices this winter, and we are expecting that there will have to be an upward reconciliation in August.
Thank you.
With that upward reconciliation, is there interest added to that?
I have to check on if there are carrying charges applied to it. That's a good question. I know Mr. Creer raised it. I don't have the answer.
Okay. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Alec?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me. For the record, my name is Alec O'Mara. I am the Director of External Affairs at Unitil. Unitil has no formal position on this bill. We had no formal position on it when it was before the House as well. That's because of a very specific point of emphasis. Mr. Licata mentioned it. I'll mention it again because it's an important point. Distribution utilities do not benefit from or profit from default service rate. We have a very specific role to play with default service, and that is to follow the prescripted process that is presented to us by the Public Utilities Commission and present that rate to our customers as an option, as an option of last resort, as Chairman Vose put it. I think that's excellent language for this particular process. And the reason I wanted to speak on this bill here today is We have unique experience with this particular process, specifically with our Massachusetts service territory, and I think it's helpful background for you folks as you look at this bill. I've had some of the most interesting conversations about default service as a result of this bill with our procurement team, because a lot of this is really philosophical. I think Representative Harrington really put his finger on it when he said, is the role of default service to be competitive, or is the role of default service to be a risk-averse backstop for our customers? And I think that overall, our philosophy as a company has been more towards the idea of it being a risk-averse backstop. In fact, with our docket before the Public Utilities Commission, when we were going before this, we were asked and answered the question, Unitil would not have proposed a default service with 50% of the spot market were it up to us. We were following that directive from the Public Utilities Commission. Had it been left to us, we would have gone with a smaller or potentially no aspect within the spot market. In Massachusetts, where default service has existed a little bit more for us, Unitil operates a 4-town service territory. It represents 1% of the total load in Massachusetts. Because the aggregate market is a little more mature down there, all 4 of our communities are actually on default service. So when folks talk about what the potential end game is for this particular program, we're there in Massachusetts. All of our towns have an opt-in process that opt-in, opt-out, the one where they're already enrolled. I don't remember which way that goes, but effectively all 4 of our towns have that. So we only have a very small percentage of our total customers that are still on default service. In Massachusetts, we have had situations where we have had failed bids, where we've gone out, tried to get a bid through the auction process, and because of our smaller service territory or uncertainty regarding our total customer load in Massachusetts, we have not gotten a bid that would be considered reasonable. We've had to go to the Department of Public Utilities in Massachusetts, outline that reason, and at times with the 6-month period had to be on the spot market. So here we are in a situation where in New Hampshire, we have the option. We have said very clearly, this is not something we would pursue. Yet in Massachusetts, we've had to do so out of necessity and made that work. So we came here today, prepared to offer the same sorts of language amendments that Mr. Claude just referenced. He actually reached out to us. We've seen his language. We agree with a lot of the pieces that are in there. We think that that does a lot of the protections that need to be there if this is something that we were going to pursue. But I also very much agree with everything Chairman Vose said in terms of the complexity of this issue and the value of interim study. I think that that makes a lot of good sense with a lot of the nuanced pieces in here. The other thing I will bring up just in general is it was the Unitil docket that was looking at this idea of over and under collections. So I should mention that and mention the why, the purpose of why we were suggesting that over and under collection should be a non-bypassable charge. The concept there is the idea that default service as a whole is something that all customers benefit from. The existence of default service is something that all communities have had built into their contracts to say they can, if they want, they can come back to default service. Ergo, default service needs to be there for all customers. Again, talking about Massachusetts, where all of our towns have reached this point where they have aggregate service, it's a transient population. We have folks that are on default service for a small period of time. Maybe they drop off, maybe they're new to the region, maybe they do third-party supplier where they aren't going with the town version, but they have their own version. They drop off of it. It's there for all of them, but only a small percentage is on at any given point in time. So if it is in fact a service that benefits all customers, then there's logic in having that over and under collection be part of the entirety of the customer base. Now, the PUC has ruled on this. We consider this a settled matter. In Massachusetts, it is a situation where it is, in fact, distributed across the entirety of the service base. It would not surprise me if at some point, somewhere down the road, when New Hampshire has a similar mature process, it may be something that you want to be looking at that time. I think the fundamental point to think about when it comes to default service versus service from a competitive supplier or an aggregator is that the default service rate should not be seen as in competition with third-party suppliers. The analogy I gave before the House is that a third-party aggregator is no more or less in competition with default service than an Olympic high jumper is with the bar itself. The bar is what is set by the Public Utilities Commission in terms of the process that they outline. The utility's role is to get that rate, and that rate effectively reflects what the market rate is in terms of how that is set by the Public Utilities Commission. And that becomes the default service rate. Third-party suppliers effectively are competing with each other. The market rate, whoops, I hit the microphone there. The market rate is what the default service rate theoretically reflects, and then the default service third-party suppliers have to explain their rate relative to that rate, and then are competing with each other for the service and the business of those particular customers. The distribution utility is not in the business of default service. It is a service we provide. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
So how mature are we?
Not as mature. Clearly, there's adoption has been fairly rapid over the past couple of years. I think that's very fair to say. And I think that that's some of the concerns that you have heard in terms of the rapid dropping of that customer base that is on default service. When we had one of our communities, Fitchburg, which is the largest of the 4 communities we serve in Massachusetts, that represented, I think, something in the neighborhood of 17 to 20,000 of our 30,000 customer base in Massachusetts. They were going to drop off. When they announced that they were going to go to third-party aggregation, that change would have had a profound effect on the remaining customers that are on default service. So just because they're going off of default service, had there been a substantial over or under collection in the middle of that drop off, that could have had a profound effect on the remaining customers on default service, who again need that service for a variety of reasons, whether they go onto it, whether they choose to go onto it, none of which would have anything to do with the folks in Fitchburg. So as you have whole communities that are now adopting default service or adopting third-party supply for the very first time, you're going to see that rapid drop that's going to lead to the potential for a higher over and under collection on a smaller customer base. That's the fundamental concern at this specific moment. Once you get all the way to the end, and all theoretically, communities are doing whatever they want to be doing with third-party service, you're going to have a situation where that risk is effectively nulled. You're not going to see that anymore. But at least in this moment, I think the risk is a little bit higher.
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And Heidi, you didn't want to say anything, huh? All right, so we're going to ask Sir Elliott. And my first question is really about the new study versus the old study. If you can tap into that a little bit as well.
Yes, I'm happy to lead off with that.
And Matt.
For the record, Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs at the Department of Energy. With me, I have one of our staff attorneys, Matthew Young, who has been very involved in these particular issues. So I'm going to address your question up front and then go back. So Mr. Herndon referenced an investigatory study that was done prior to, or just in the early days of the PUC actually looking at this practice of doing these spot market purchases. Important context is to realize that that was in the immediate aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all the volatility that was going on in regards to that. Since then, we have gotten actual real data to take an examination as to how this practice has actually worked. I believe the time there's about a 15-month time period that we've been looking at initially that shows that there are real savings to customers in New Hampshire as a result of these practices. Regarding this other study that is being referenced, I think as Mr. O'Mara referenced, that it has come up in both the Unitil docket, the Eversource docket. There's been a couple of places where these things have sort of popped up sort of organically in different places that the department is looking to make a wholesale recommendation to the commission during the summer in one of those venues as to how to do this process properly. And I think this is, I'm not going to go into all of the details. And I think folks have sort of laid out what exactly has happened and what has gone on with the Public Utilities Commission in terms of doing this process. Hear a lot of overcollection, undercollection, proxy prices, risk premium, and things like that. I'm sure your heads are all swimming at this point this early on a Tuesday morning. Clear as mud. So when it comes down to it, a big sort of part of the discussion, right, is around this proxy price. And essentially, when you're going out to the day-ahead market, right, you can't forecast 6 months in advance as to what that number is going to be, right, the way you can with a 6-month fixed price contract. Oh, I should start. The department is opposed to this bill.
Yeah, I get that.
Sorry, yeah, sorry, you do, the people behind me, not necessarily know that. Yes, yes. So there's a methodology that has been developed to develop this proxy price, essentially to say, okay, because we have to charge you today, what we're trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future, right? 6-month fixed price contract, you know exactly what that number is, right? Proxy price, you have to make a really good estimate as to what that price is going to be over the course of the 6-month time period. And as folks have discussed, these have resulted in under-collections. I'm certainly sympathetic to the folks who are competitive suppliers because they can't just roll that forward, right? If you're in default service, you can roll that forward and then collect that from all customers. So the real crux of it is how to set that proxy price. The department is working on a methodology that would be a better approach to setting that proxy price. Have it be more accurate, have it be more reflective, and not have these carrying costs going forward in terms of these under collections, where that would solve the question of, okay, is default service rates lower than they should be because of this, essentially this methodology issue, and then inadvertently undercutting the open market for competitive suppliers and others. And the answer is, right, this is thankfully, this is such a situation where you can have your cake and you can eat it too, right? You fix the proxy price methodology, you take care of the non-competitive nature of it, but you still get the lower rates for consumers who are in default service. This bill would close the door on any discussion around that. And I think it's very important that the PUC's hands are not tied in doing this. I know there is a lot of recent history with the legislature, going back to, the House Bill 549 with New Hampshire Saves program of having some skepticism about the decision-making process at the PUC. I would just encourage the committee that there's a new chairman. There are 2 new members of the commission that since those things have happened. The new chairman has been there for less than a week, just over a week at this point, to give them the opportunity to be able to go down this path. And we talk a lot about risk premium in terms of these discussions. And this is sort of a real life example that happened to me that I think is a perfect illustration of risk premium that's probably a little bit more relatable on a day-to-day basis. Car insurance, right? So I was going through the process when we purchased our home. We're bundling auto insurance, life insurance, car insurance, everything together. So we're going through the whole process talking about car insurance. And she said, okay, here's your deductible. It's $500. Here's your premium. And I thought, ooh, that's a little bit steep for car insurance premium. So I said, okay, what happens if we go to $1,000 for a premium on car insurance? She said, oh, I'm looking at the numbers here. As long as you don't get into a car accident in the next 18 months, you're actually going to be ahead of the game. I'm like, oh, okay. What happens if we go to $2,000 deductible? She goes, you'll save an additional $8 a month. I'm like, okay, that's not really worth it. But, $500, it was very expensive, but, there's a lot of coverage there. But there's sort of there ended up being a sweet spot in the middle of, okay, with a little bit of risk, I can see some substantial savings in my premiums that are actually folding money, involve a little more risk, but are actual real life savings that can be counted on. So I know there's been some discussion about the second half of the bill as well, which was the underlying bill that originally was in the House. I think folks have discussed, the policy of the commission through a couple of the dockets have sort of highlighted out that is the current policy, that the commission has ruled on that several times, that default service costs stay within default service, and that's reasonable. The way that this is contemplated and the language is contemplated, that it really handcuffs the commission if there's something in an emergency situation or something absurd results. I know Mr. Herndon referenced the Liberty Default Service needing to adjust their rates mid-cycle or proposing to adjust their rates mid-cycle. Portion of those under recoveries were a result of issues that are completely unrelated to this, right? Over and under recoveries happen all the time, right? Sometimes they net themselves out, that's smaller or bigger, for a variety of circumstances outside of actual default service procurements. but part of that, and the reason for the midterm rate increase request is that there is a real concern that you could end up seeing a death spiral within default service, of where, for a variety of circumstances, no fault of anybody else, of either towns moving to community aggregation or moving to competitive suppliers, that your base to recover these rates is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller, to where you could end up at the point of where you have, a handful of small towns bearing the costs of people who have already left, but that have already been incurred, and you're going to see the rates skyrocket for those communities. Again, the current practice of the PUC, default service charges stay within default service, but the language as presented doesn't contemplate those sort of emergency situations. It was originally hypothetical when we were discussing this during the House phase. That has become a little bit more concrete, so I would certainly urge the committee not to bind the hands of the Public Utilities Commission. They can schedule a hearing next week. If it's the wrong time of year for the legislature, it could take you a year to come back to address what that emergency situation is. So, long story short, I think it's better. I think interim study is a good motion for this. Let the process play out with the experts in the room, talking about risk premiums, overcollections, undercollections, proxy prices. Let that sort itself out. Again, if the PUC makes a wrong decision or does something doesn't fit, or it's not the will of the legislature, or there's significant concerns, right, there's always the option to come back. But especially when the evidence has shown that there are significant cost savings that can result from doing this process, I think it's worth to let the commission continue doing their work, let the stakeholders come in, present their things. And again, a lot of the issues come down to really that proxy price, of making sure that proxy price is set correctly, and that there's a correct methodology to doing that. And a lot of these issues sort of become non-issues. They're ameliorated because of that.
Thank you. Matt, is he correct?
Yes, I have nothing really to add to what Josh just said.
I'm glad we had this talk.
I will just add, I did speak to the chairman prior to coming here that if there are any questions for the commission, I'm happy to facilitate that. I think most of you already have his contact information, but he wanted me to make sure that message was conveyed to you.
Thank you very much. And Senator Rosenwald with a question.
Thank you. I guess I would just start out by saying my constituents have not been seeing savings on their electric bills. They've been seeing really large increases over the past year. But my question goes to your example about the car insurance. And I always like it when people use examples like that. But in thinking about it, isn't it different in that you buy car insurance, you have an accident, that's one time, you pay $1,000 and that's your cap. But with electricity, you might turn your heat up, or you might buy a bigger refrigerator, or turn your lights on. And so your exposure as a ratepayer is not capped, even, as residential, but also as a commercial ratepayer, you might do some business expansion. So you're not protected the same way you are by car insurance. Am I wrong?
I was sort of just discussing about risk premium in terms of what you control, what you can't control, in terms of trying to find that sweet spot. But yes, there's a whole bunch of decisions that can go into the process of doing electricity. I will say, I don't know where Nashua is in terms of if they're all in default service, if there's other suppliers that they're going with, but I don't know off the top of my head, but in terms of the price increases. But yeah, and those are all decisions that are made by the individual, right? If they are, I would certainly encourage those folks, if they're thinking of doing those things, to reach out to New Hampshire Saves, get an energy audit done on their home. There are things that's also within the consumer's power and the business's power to make themselves more energy efficient, to reduce their costs that way as well. There's also that risk premium within utility default service, right? We saw with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right? Default service went up to 24 cents, right? There's still risk within that as well. There's no, you could have a perfectly flat rate, but you'd be paying through the nose for it. for absolutely for absolute 100% insurance that your rate will never ever change for 20 years, right? You can enter into a PPA with a company, for example, right? Yeah, right. There are ways to reduce that risk, but it's a matter of what is that appropriate? What is that level of risk premium versus flexibility in prices? And we'll just say this, right? With a 6-month fixed price contract, right? We've seen recent developments in the Middle East, right? If utility default service procurement had gone out during the wrong week, right, we could be locked into those rates for 6 months, right? It cuts both ways too, right? You could get locked in for 6 months at very high rates while the things settle themselves out, right? Wholesale markets calm down, and that there could be significant cost savings from that as well. So it really, and it's right, you have to net that out to figure out, okay, is this risk premium actually worth what we're paying for? And I think that's what the commission is trying to figure out through doing this process. Is the risk premium that we're paying through default service currently actually worth what we're paying for it?
Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to close the hearing and open up the next one on HB 1535. Hear from the prime sponsor. We're going to be losing some of our colleagues here soon, so let's this along. I think we're going to be executing much today. We're going to be losing everybody. Yeah. Representative, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman Avard. Tom Corman, I represent Grafton 15, which is Ward 3 of the City of Lebanon. And I realized when I was here last week, I said Ward 2. I don't know why, but I represent Ward 3 of the City of Lebanon. And I'm also the Deputy Ranking Member on the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, here to introduce HB 1535. I believe you're getting a handout right now. I refer to this as the semicolon bill. It's also really the punctuation and lack thereof bill. So what I've given you is the beginning of RSA 362F:4, which defines some of Class 1 in the Renewable Portfolio Standard. It's not all of Class 1, it's just the first 7 items. And you'll notice in item B, it says geothermal energy with a comma after it. In item E, it says methane gas with no punctuation after it. And item G, it says solar thermal energy with a semicolon after it. And it turns out this punctuation is significant. And the reason it's significant is, as I said, I represent Lebanon. We have a landfill in Lebanon that people just love. People come from all around to
We're not
give us,
talking landfills today.
people come from all around to give us their trash.
Yeah.
This landfill, being a landfill, produces methane gas. And the City of Lebanon uses that methane gas to produce electricity. However, because of the lack of punctuation after methane gas in item E, the Department of Energy has said that the City of Lebanon is not entitled to renewable energy credits for methane gas used to create electricity, only to create useful thermal energy. And we're creating electricity. So Clifton Below suggested to me that we have such a bill to correct this interpretation. And his suggestion was to put a semicolon after methane gas. I directed the Dartmouth College writing program for 4 years. And one thing I can tell you is if the problem is punctuation, the problem is not punctuation. The problem is lack of clear wording. And hence the bill that I submitted, which really just rewrites but makes it clear. So geothermal energy, but for useful thermal energy, the unit must begin operation after January 1st, 2013. Methane gas, but for useful thermal energy, the unit must begin operation after January 1st, 2013, and then similar for solar thermal energy, making it clear the intent that these are allowed for electricity, but for useful thermal energy, it has to begin after 2013. That's the idea of the bill. My understanding is the way that we got here, and I got this from Mr. Below, is that when the RPS was originally designed in 2007, it allowed for methane gas for electricity. And then there was a Senate bill in 2018 that added on the useful thermal energy to methane gas, and there was no punctuation, and hence the DOE interpretation. So this is really to correct a misinterpretation, what we believe to be a misinterpretation, and just allow methane gas to count for electric wrecks.
Of course.
Could you please just tell me what is the significance of this date? That January 1st,
Oh,
2013.
I couldn't tell you. I wasn't in the legislature then. I don't know.
Yeah, you can't. So what was your question again?
Why is it as of January 1st, 2013?
Well, I was around then.
I was too.
We can ask DOE, but this is a date at which other provisions of statute came in, so we were noting the facilities that came online after that, but not ones prior to it because of the different regime affecting them. So anyways, DOE can explain it, but there's a reason for that.
Ask if that's
It's an
fair.
important reason for that date, yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. No further questions.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have absolutely nobody opposed to this. Everybody's in support of this, and we have an ambivalent, which we would call Sir Elliott. Hope you don't mind me saying that. It's respect. Thank you, Joshua. We're gonna lose you.
I don't mind at all, Senator. I'm flattered even. So I will be brief. Josh Elliott, Director of the Division of Policy and Programs, Department of Energy. As Representative Corman accurately noted, given the different punctuations in each of those lines, interpretation was the department was the legislature must have meant different things by each of those things because otherwise it would have been the same. As his bill, as passed by the House, would provide that clarity. I've included a letter here. He's explained all the backstory behind it. I've included as part of our letter, if there was a desire by the committee to recodify that section of statute, and rather than have them in line with each other, have them clearly separated out. We went back and looked to see if there were any circular references to make sure all the other references were caught. You can do that. You can leave it as it is. Either way, it's fine. So we appreciate, as I think I have spoken repeatedly in the committee, the department always appreciates legislative clarity in enacting these things. So we have no objections. We don't think it's an unreasonable thing. As the prime sponsor referenced, there was a change in 2018. We could not figure out if that was intentional by the legislature or inadvertent by the legislature in terms of changing that punctuation. I will say Representative Corman is modest. The entire House S&E committee defers to him on any and all grammar matters. So.
We have one of those. Thank you, Joshua. Seeing no further questions, that's it.
Thank you.
So we're going to close the, nope.
I'm sorry, I was out of the room. Did
Yes.
he answer my question about why we would nail down January 13th of 2013?
Yeah. So in consulting with one of my colleagues in the audience, our understanding is that that was when those particular pieces went into effect. So other things were other technologies were added to the renewable portfolio standard, and that reflects when those would have become effective. That's my understanding. I will need to. I trust my attorney, but if folks have contrary information, yeah.
All right. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank
We're
you.
going to close the hearing on this. You want to exec it? It's not a big deal. You want to wait?
I'd like to talk to Rep. Corman about his punctuation.
Absolutely. All right.
From one writing teacher to another.
Roger that. Okay, so we're not going to.
I mean, if we recess for just a couple minutes.
We could, but we're going to lose another.
Oh.
Yeah.
I've got about 20 minutes.
You got 20 minutes. This would probably be the only bill that we're going to exec at this point. with that, I'm going to just see y'all next week.
All right.
All right. You are dismissed. Released.
Yeah.